Jimmy Swaggart, once a towering figure in American televangelism, has died at the age of 90, marking the end of an era that was as inspiring as it was controversial. He passed away while surrounded by family, following weeks of being unconscious in an intensive care unit after suffering a heart attack on June 15 at his home in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. His passing has reignited deep conversations about redemption, faith, power, and the fragile line between salvation and scandal. For over 70 years, Swaggart was not just a preacher but a cultural force, an embodiment of the American evangelical movement in its most theatrical and emotionally charged form. He wasn't just a man behind a pulpit. He was a presence that millions of households welcomed into their living rooms each week. With his southern drawl, emotional sermons, and tearful appeals, he captivated audiences across generations and continents. His church, in a statement confirming his death, called his life a testament to the saving power of Jesus Christ and the baptism of the Holy Spirit, reminding the world of the sheer scale of his influence even in his final years. But the story of Jimmy Swaggart is one that defies simple summaries. It's not just the rise and fall of a televangelist, it's a sweeping American tale of faith, fame, failure, and fragile redemption. Born in Faraday, Louisiana, a small town with little more than dusty roads and humble churches, Swaggart's roots were modest. His cousin was rock and roll legend Jerry Lee Lewis, and music pulsed through the Swaggart bloodline. But while Lewis took to the piano keys with a rebellious spirit, Swaggart turned his attention to gospel music and preaching, combining the two in a formula that would revolutionize religious media. By the 1960s, he had begun broadcasting his sermons on local radio and television, slowly growing a following. The Real explosion came in the 1970s and especially the 1980s, as Swaggart emerged as one of the leading voices of televangelism, a booming industry powered by the fusion of religious fervor and American capitalism. His sermons weren't just spiritual, they were dramatic, theatrical, and emotional. Whether weeping before the cross or shouting about the devil's grasp, he was a master performer in the pulpit. His broadcasts eventually reached millions of viewers in more than 100 countries, and his empire swelled with donations, merchandise, music albums, and massive revival events. The peak of his influence in the 1980s, Swaggart's ministry was raking in an estimated $140 million annually. That's over $350 million in today's money. He had an international audience, a 7,000-seat family worship center in Baton Rouge, and an empire that rivaled many Fortune 500 companies. But for all the money, Swaggart always painted himself as a humble servant of God, a man who wore his emotions on his sleeve and preached with passion. He described himself as an old-fashioned, Holy Ghost-filled, shouting, weeping, soul-winning, gospel-preaching preacher, and his followers believed every word. The services he led were emotionally charged affairs. Congregants often broke into tears, raised their hands to the sky, and even spoke in tongues, a hallmark of the Pentecostal tradition Swaggart championed. There was a power in his voice, in his cadence, in the sincerity that seemed to pour out of him. It wasn't just a church, it was an experience. Yet behind the curtain of holy fire and spiritual zeal was a man grappling with human weakness. And it was that humanity, especially the parts he tried to hide, that would become his downfall. In 1988, the world watched as Swaggart's carefully constructed empire began to crumble. The scandal that erupted wasn't just tabloid fodder, it was a moral earthquake that shook the foundations of evangelical America. Photos emerged showing the revered televangelist with a sex worker in New Orleans. The images didn't just tarnish his reputation, they shattered the illusion of perfection that many of his followers had projected onto him. Here was a man who had railed for years against the sins of the flesh, who had condemned others for moral failings, now caught in the very trap he had warned against. The backlash was swift and merciless. Religious networks dropped his broadcasts. Longtime allies in the conservative Christian world distanced themselves. And yet, Swaggart did not hide. In fact, he did what only he could do, he wept. In a televised sermon broadcast to millions, Swaggart stood trembling at the pulpit. Tears streamed down his face. His voice cracked under the weight of shame. To the hundreds of millions that I have stood before, I have sinned against you and I beg you to forgive me, he said. "I have sinned against you, my lord." The image of Swaggart, face contorted with sorrow, hands clutching the pulpit, became one of the most iconic moments in modern religious history. Some found the performance deeply moving. Others saw it as manipulative. But no one could deny the raw emotion of it. It was, in many ways, the moment that defined him, not the scandals themselves, but his reaction to them. He didn't deny. He didn't deflect. He confessed, publicly, painfully, dramatically. And for a while it seemed that his ministry might survive. But the troubles didn't end there. In 1991, just 3 years after the initial scandal, Swaggart was caught again, this time in California with another sex worker. Public had less patience the second time around. And Swaggart's tone had changed too. There were no tears this time, no pleading. When questioned about the incident, he famously responded, "The Lord told me it's flat, none of your business." It was a defiant statement, one that marked a shift in the way he presented himself. Preacher who once wept before the world now stood firm, unapologetic, hardened by years of public judgment and personal turmoil. His fall from grace was cemented when the Assemblies of God, the conservative Pentecostal denomination he had long been associated with, officially defrocked him. He was cast out, abandoned by many of the very institutions he had helped build. His media empire collapsed. His staff was reduced. Legal troubles surrounding unpaid taxes and financial mismanagement drained his remaining resources. Where once his ministry had employed hundreds and brought in millions, now it was a shadow of its former self. Yet Jimmy Swaggart did not disappear. He didn't vanish into obscurity. Instead, he rebuilt, quietly, slowly, defiantly. He continued to preach from his Baton Rouge church. He launched his own independent broadcast network, which, though much smaller, retained a loyal base of supporters. His sermons still aired. His music still played. His books still sold. In some circles, he remained a revered figure. In others, a cautionary tale. And as he aged, a different kind of Jimmy Swaggart emerged, not the firebrand of the 1980s, but a softer, more introspective figure. He no longer tried to dominate the national stage. He no longer aspired to be the voice of a movement. Instead, he focused on the church he still had, the people who still believed, the gospel he still preached. There's something uniquely American about his story. The rise from obscurity, the meteoric success, public downfall, the stubborn refusal to go away. And beneath it all, the question that has haunted countless men of the cloth: how can a man be both prophet and sinner? Swaggart's life forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about faith, about fame, about the people we choose to follow. He preached with unmatched passion. He reached millions. He helped people find meaning, hope, and spiritual awakening. And yet, he was deeply flawed, a man whose personal demons never stopped haunting him. In death, as in life, Jimmy Swaggart leaves behind a legacy that is impossible to summarize in black and white. His ministry changed lives. His scandals broke hearts. His resilience amazed even his critics. And through it all, he remained uniquely himself, a man who could weep in front of the world, fall from unimaginable heights, and still find a way to stand behind the pulpit again. He was survived by his wife, Frances, to whom he was married for over 7 decades, a partnership that endured even the darkest chapters. His son, Donnie Swaggart, who had already taken over leadership of the ministry in his father's later years, stood by him during his final moments. "All of the family has been called in," Donnie told the congregation shortly before his father's passing. The moment was intimate, somber, and full of reverence, a man who had seen the heights and depths of faith, now meeting his final reward. Whether remembered as a fallen angel or a redeemed soul, Jimmy Swaggart's story remains one of the most compelling in the history of American religion. He was, in the end, not just a preacher, not just a sinner, not just a showman, but a mirror reflecting the complexity of belief, humanity, and the struggle to live up to the ideals we preach.